In A Brief History of the Future, you go into 6 episodes. Each of those are a pillar of how the future could look like in technology, sustainability, science, culture, community. And so how are those pillars, or rather, how can we approach those pillars to build that vision, and how does that vision really look like? I know it's a protopia. I know Kevin Kelly's, spoiler alert, he's going to come on the show soon.
Great.
But yeah, so that vision in itself, we like, how can we rally towards that one vision?
So what we do in the show is, you're right, we look at a lot of these kind of verticals, housing and food and education, but we actually in the episodes do a crosscut horizontally. So the first episode is focused on just our conception of time, beyond the now. So first thing we want to do is kind of expand our temporal horizons, backwards and forwards. The next thing in episode 2 is chaos and complexity, which we've already touched on. What is this moment? And what could come out of it? So we think about the struggles of this moment, but we also need to think about the opportunities of this moment. In the greatest, physicists always come back to this idea that in the greatest moments of chaos, we can have a phase shift, or actually chemists talk about this, where a singular or multiple catalysts can reorder to a completely new way of being. Obviously, they mean this for a compound or a substrate. I'm talking about it at a societal level, at a planetary level. The third episode is about the stories that we tell about the futures and who gets to tell them. So we've touched on this. The fourth episode is about what does it mean to be human? And again, we don't put our thumb on the scales here. We look at human augmentation, how we are with each other, how we think about living and dying and lifestyles. The fifth episode is about community. The number one thing I found traveling the world for this show, when I asked people about what are the futures that they would like to see happen and occur, always involved the word community. So it became very obvious that was going to be kind of the penultimate episode that leads us into episode 6, where we kind of start to think about what these futures could look like. So what the show does is it's meant to kind of open your mind to rethinking how we think about tomorrow, which then leads into your question about what are the futures, not the singular future, because that's a trap. If we say this is what it's going to be like, and that is a trap only based on the historical record. Whenever anyone has said, this is what it's going to be, that's never worked out well for us. So what we have to do is we have to think of what are the multiple futures, but we have to bound it and constrain it. And what that means is we're not Pollyannish. We have to work with human nature. It goes back to the earlier part of our conversation. And we have to think about it almost through a Rawlsian justice. How do we build a world that allows for the maximum flourishing of the individual that doesn't come at the expense of any other individual or at the expense of the planet and the ecosystem, and importantly, at the expense of future generations, right? One of the things we talk about in the show is how we've colonized the future. Mm-hmm. We've taken resources from tomorrow and brought them into today. That is not the kind of futures that we want if we want to be ethical in terms of transgenerational justice and transgenerational empathy, a core part of the book and of the show. And so what the show becomes is a launching pad for individuals to step back, both as an individual, within a family unit, however they define that, within the organizations, at a societal level. This is a lot for a show to ask, and say, where do we want to go? What are the goals? Knowing that those will be iterative. What do we want to be our land of milk and honey, ongoing for generations? And remember, one of the things about that, and ask Kevin Kelly about this, about Protopia, there's no end point. There's no, here's the Garden of Eden, everything's fine. I don't believe in that. I believe for the next several thousand, 50,000, 100,000 years, we will consistently become better. We will become better versions of what this human hardware can become. Will we augment it? Sure. Will we at some point find a way to go, string theory, ultra-dimensional? Maybe. But what's important to me is not that we get to Mars or get outside of the solar system, which is important and an interesting question. The more interesting question is, how do we get there as the best version of Homo sapiens possible? Because if I was to take 1,000 people from planet Earth right now and throw them on Mars, and they just replicated what we had here, I'd say it wasn't worth the jet fuel. But if we actually think about how do we evolve our internal tools, our internal ways of seeing and thinking about the futures that we want, then we're onto something. And that's what the show gets us towards.
Yeah, I've hosted Roman Kuchnarik. He wrote the Good Ancestor, and he
Good
mentioned how he colonized the future. So that's the first time I hear it back.
Yeah.
I'm gonna re-listen to that episode as well. And yeah, it's so interesting because, like you say, we're in this pivotal moment where it does seem like we're just in the cusp of everything. It kind of seems black and white in a sense, to be honest. We can go, extrapolate ourselves into Mars, going into Mars, but at the same time, ending civilization. And, the overarching theme of this conversation with you, my goal was to, understand that humanity has its faults, but humanity in itself, has its benefits too. Like, we created a new species, which is the golden Labrador. It didn't exist before.
Yeah.
We can do cool stuff, and we just need that story to tap into. And we also need to highlight the stories of the people who are building, an optimistic future. Which you spoke, Ari, with French President Macron, U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, French football star and co-producer, executive producer of the show, Brief History of the Future, Kylian Mbappe, and others. And so, what are these individuals have in common in terms of how they see the future, and how can we, I don't have the power to shoot the finals penalty kick, winning the World Cup, but I can choose to make a better decision in my life according to their archetypes. So what do they have in common, Ari?
What they all have in common, and there's so many more. Ellen MacArthur was that. I mean, it's just on, is that, and I know this sounds Pollyannish, but it's a belief that our best days are in front of us. And that, counter to, the doomsday clock ticking down, there's also a clock ticking up.